Very much, John. Whenever I give a speech from a balcony, I always feel a bit like Mussolini. Now you threw me a bit for a second there. I was trying to think William, but then of course I've worked out what it is. The King William IV. You might not know this. King William IV had a mistress called Dorothy Jordan, who was an actress.
I wasn't going to mention that.
And so I think they had a baby, and that baby was my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather's. That's right, I'm a royal bastard. Sometimes in British politics they leave the royal bit off, but they just go straight down to business. I cannot tell you what a pleasure it is to be here. I really am. I've been very excited about making this trip. Obviously, as Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary, you get to go to a lot of interesting places. I've had lunch in the Kremlin. I've had dinner in the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. I've been to extraordinary places around the world. I even had a ball at the White House once with President Obama. But there's something about coming here that is incredibly special. And I want to tell you why. Because in 1982, I was a 15-year-old boy at school. And when I heard about the invasion of the Falkland Islands by the Argentinians, I became fascinated by what had happened. Why? Who were these people who lived so far away from Britain? And I wanted to understand all of the issues about that terrible conflict and invasion, and how the people here just wanted the right of self-determination. They wanted to choose who they were and under whose rule they fell. And then I watched and listened on the radio every day as that incredibly brave decision was made by Margaret Thatcher to send the task force all the way down to the Falkland Islands and to South Georgia, and to so bravely liberate the people that lived here. I used to switch on the radio sometimes every half an hour to try and pick up the latest bit of news. And it was an extraordinary thing to follow. And obviously, it had a huge effect on me as a young person growing up and thinking about politics and international affairs and what these things meant. And it stayed with me. It obviously had a huge effect on our country, because suddenly a brave decision was made, and we stood up for something we believed in, and we helped people we cared about and loved, and it made a difference. But it also actually, I think, changed the world. That these two words, self-determination, became more important, and people could see that it really meant something. You should allow people to make those choices. But I think the most important thing that it did, and what has really struck me about today, is that it had the most monumental and positive effect on the Falkland Islands and on all of you. And I came here today, obviously having read about some of the changes that have been made and the growth in the population, but I wasn't quite prepared for what an incredible, modern, thriving, varied community that you've built here, with so many different businesses and interests and so many different communities who come to work and make their life here, and all that you've done to create what is an extraordinary part of the British family. So I wanted to say how much it really means to me coming here and being with you, meeting you, and seeing what you've built. And I'll just repeat some of the things I said in the good, positive meeting we had with the MLAs, because I think it's important that you hear it from the British Foreign Secretary. And as I say, I had an apprentice to be Foreign Secretary. I was Prime Minister for 6 years, just a sort of warm-up. But I want you to know something about the British Prime Minister. Of course, you know, the early meetings you have are vital national security issues, and you have to write the letter of last resort that goes on the nuclear submarine that's part of our continuous at sea deterrent. But I want you to know this, early on, very early on, the National Security Advisor comes to see you to talk to you about the security of the Falkland Islands and how much it matters and how much we want to maintain that security. And they talk to you about all that we know in terms of the intelligence picture and everything else to try and make sure that we keep this place safe. It really, you do matter to British Prime Ministers. I want you to know that. And I just wanted to say some of the things we talked about today, because I think there's some things that you should hear from a British Foreign Secretary. The first one is this: for as long as you want to be part of the British family, we will always want you to be part of it, and we will defend your sovereign right to make that choice, which is what you did. You didn't have to have a very public vote about it, but you did, and it couldn't have been more emphatic. And that is something we can take to every part of the world. Anyone who doubts your choice or the clarity of your choice, as I said to the members of the Legislative Assembly, I think your referendum went rather better than one of mine. I did win 3 other ones, but we'll pass it. That's the first point. The second point is that we will always maintain your defences. I hope it'll never be necessary. I think we now have quite a different Argentinian government, but I think it's important that you hear that. I think the third thing to say is, of course, we want to have better relations with Argentina. That makes sense for 2 grown-up countries to talk to each other about matters of common interest. And of course, there are things that Argentina could change with respect to its attitude towards the Falkland Islands that would help you. But let me say this, we will never prioritise our relationship with Argentina over the wishes of the Falkland Islanders. And I use the word wishes, not interests. Sometimes I think people can think they know what your interests are without listening to what your wishes are. And I think it's really important that you hear that. Fourth thing, there are lots of things that I know you want to fix to make this place even better than it is. But I think the issue of making sure you have good connectivity, whether it's the air bridge to the United Kingdom, which is not always quite as reliable as we'd like it to be, but also the issue of trying to make sure you can have restored those flights to Sao Paulo and connectivity to the continent of South America. That is something we should try to achieve, because that is something that would be good for you and indeed good for South America as well. What number are we on? Fifth thing. You have some important economic interests. You have a great fishing industry. You have a growing tourist industry. You have the opportunity, potentially, of not just a renewable energy industry, but also exploiting all of the natural resources that you have. That is your choice, your call. But I want to be very clear to you that, yes, we are a government that believes in transitioning away from oil and gas. We're a government that believes in net zero, but it is net zero, not zero. We are going to need oil and gas in our world for the next few years and maybe more. And to me it makes sense, if we have some oil and gas, to extract it ourselves rather than have to go to other parts of the world in order to buy it. Now, in the United Kingdom, we are having new licenses for oil and gas in the North Sea. And I don't think it would be right to say to you that you can't make the same choices yourself here in the Falkland Islands. So it's something we're going to talk about how you pursue that, about how you work out the regulatory system, and indeed if there are things that we can do to help you in that quest. I think I'm on about number 6. And that is that you are a real shining light when it comes to the environment, sustainability and conservation. And we shouldn't forget that. In fact, we should help you to highlight it. There are many parts of the world that are struggling with biodiversity, that can't seem to maintain it and enhance it, that are struggling with rebuilding habitats and rebuilding wildlife. You show how it can be done, and we should be doing more to make sure that we help you to do that. Final thing I want to say, which I think, John, you referenced, which is the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office that I now lead. There's got lots of things we have to do. We've got the Commonwealth that we have to look after. We've got all the embassies, about 120 of them around the world, that we have to look after. We've got a development budget. I didn't really like the merger of DFID and the Foreign Office, but now it's happened. I've got a $12 billion budget, and I quite like that, actually. But there's something else we're responsible for, and that is Britain's overseas territories. And I think sometimes in the past they've been too much of an afterthought rather than being a core part of what we do in the Foreign Office. You've seen in David Rutley, we've got an absolutely first-class minister who not only looks after the Americas, and that includes all of the Americas and, of course, the Falkland Islands, but who also is responsible for the overseas territories. And I want to make sure that we do everything we can to help work with you, respecting the independence of your government and the choices that you make, but we work in partnership with you and help where we can. Whether it's on pensions, whether it's on demining, whether it's on hydrocarbons, whether it's on energy, whether it's on the economy, whether it's on links to Latin America and bridges home and all the rest of it. All of those things. And I think it's something we should do more to set out, perhaps in a letter when I get home, of all the things we've talked about, all the things we're going to help with. We can't always promise we'll come up with that help, but what we can promise is we should have a very clear agenda where we know what you want, we know what you want help with, and we do our very best to deliver it. But I end, as it were, where I began, which is thinking back to that 15-year-old boy crouched over his radio, listening to what was happening thousands of miles away, and realizing that it was an incredibly important moment, not just in my development, not just in Britain's history, but a crucial moment for all of you. And it was very meaningful and moving, standing in front of those war memorials today and thinking of the people who gave their life so that you could choose to be free and choose the life that you want to have. And I think that, of course, they made the ultimate sacrifice. But I think if they saw what you've built and the community you've created, they would know they didn't just die for an important principle, which is the right of people to have self-determination, to say, no, we do not want to be ruled by a bunch of people just because they've invaded our country. We want to make our own choice. But also, it wasn't just a principle. It was people that wanted to build a bright and glowing and modern and diverse and great future. And that's what you've done in the Falklands, and I congratulate you for it. Thank you very much.